Hello, everyone. Welcome back to You Thought You Knew, the podcast where we talk about Survivor players that we think may be underrated, underappreciated, or just misunderstood. Each episode, we try to answer a question that's designed to make us challenge our preconceived notions about a famous Survivor contestant. Of course, there are no right answers. It's just an excuse to talk about our favorite show. I am your co-host, Nigel Bocanegra, and I am joined by my partner in crime, Kevin McLain.
Yes, excited to be here and talking about a really fun and I think kind of polarizing contestant. So it'll be a really fun recording today.
And I love a polarizing contestant. And we are also joined today by a guest that I'm very excited to be speaking with today. We are speaking with the David Bloomberg. David, how are you?
Good. Glad to be here. And, you said there are no right answers. I'm used to there being right answers. So, we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to talk to David today because I was telling Nigel right before we started recording is that as I think back about what it was like becoming a Survivor fan and like kind of developing all these opinions, right? You follow they'd call them like thought leaders, influencers, if you will. And it's like, I think David Bloomberg might have been one of the first people to leave an impression on me as a Survivor fan, because you're reading columns, you're following things, you're seeing it through a specific person's lens and like what they're valuing. And so I think it's not a surprise that I valued a lot of like strategic methodical gameplay, because I think that's kind of the way that David had framed things. And David, I'll tell you, this is teenage Kevin. So this is probably 2008 or so.
Mm-hmm.
I had read every single Why X Lost article that you had posted on Reality News Online, and I created a big spreadsheet. This is like my nerdy teen Survivor Microsoft Excel 2003, and like scored everyone based on all of the different rules, like 10 points for plotting and scheming, 8 points for this, and tried to put them in kind of order to really understand the show. And so David, I hope you appreciate the flowers I'm giving you, because I think it was such a huge influence on me, and I'm excited that we get to talk about Survivor.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you went through all that. That's amazing. That's probably more than I ever did. Some people have asked me like, hey, have you ever ranked everyone? And I've always said, no, I never have. Now I'll know who to send them to.
Yeah,
there you go.
And I will say, I recall who I put in as number one based on reading all your columns, because I may not have agreed with every single line here and there, but like in general, like it's a great blueprint. I love there's a structure, there are, it's like a rubric.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a way to try to be fair when looking at all these different players.
Exactly, because I think everyone can be criticized to an extent, but the number one person who I believe was the best player of all time, at least until like Samoa Heroes versus Villains, where you have a whole new chapter unleashed, was Brian Heidik.
Mm-hmm.
And David also did the Thailand for the top 40 countdown on RHAP. Yep. And I think using those metrics, it was like, this is actually a really strong player that was really dominant. I think people forget pre-Kim Spradlin, Brian Heidik was like one of the most respected players from like a gameplay perspective.
Yeah. Other than Richard Hatch and Rob Sesternino, you will see Brian's name in there, and maybe more than Richard Hatch. You will see Brian's name in the full version of the rules more than anyone. I've called Wendell and Dom a Brian Heidik duo, between the two of them. And so I'm still making those comparisons, even though, a lot of people are like, who's this Brian guy? Or we don't want to talk about this Brian.
Exactly.
Guy. Yeah.
Exactly. But, I think it's because I think Thailand's a season a lot of people might skip. But I think, and I think sometimes Borneo and All-Stars, speaking about the person we're going to talk about today, can also sometimes be skipped by people. So I think it's so important to like always kind of reframe and give people, an angle. If they wanted to watch Thailand, if they wanted to watch All-Stars, like what are the ways that you can look at it through to have the best appreciation for the product that it is? And that's what the show's all about. So I'm excited to talk about our people today.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, you guys, you gave me props. I want to give you props because I was sitting here in the off season. I had watched a couple of Big Brother seasons, which was a lot. And then I started listening to your podcasts, and I'm like, I haven't watched All Stars in a while. And so because you talked about several of the people on All Stars, especially Sheehan, I was like, I'm going to go back and watch All Stars. And then as I was almost done with that, you contacted me and, about Jenna. I'm like, okay, that's my next rewatch. Borneo again. So
It was perfect, meant to be.
Yeah,
right?
really inspiring. And I think All Stars, for people who have a lot of reverence for the show, it's not the most popular season in the world, but like it is like an origin point for a lot of like legends, and like there's so much to analyze now that we are in an era where it's like there's so many returnees, there's so many different spin-off opportunities, but like there's an intensity about All Stars that I find very unique. So I'm excited to talk about it. And are you ready for me to introduce?
Yeah, let's get into the star of the evening,
The dramatic pitch here.
Jenna Lewis.
At the time of the All Stars cast reveal, many fans believed Jenna Lewis had only been invited to All Stars because actual Borneo sweetheart Colleen Haskell declined. But in her return appearance, Jenna Lewis made a brand new name for herself. No longer content to be another pagong led to the slaughter, she became strategically assertive and championed the idea that the winners were dead on arrival. Her spunky nature and outspoken personality persisted, but in All Stars, it was in a different, more cutthroat and villainous package. You thought you knew Jenna Lewis? Well, we think we do. And on this episode of You Thought You Knew, we'll be answering the question, is Jenna Lewis the perfect heel turn?
So, for those who may not be very familiar with the phrase, the heel turn is a wrestling reference originally for someone who was originally a villain and turns into a hero over time. But it has, I think, grown to be any type of change in the nature of the character.
So it's maybe a small correction. It's, I think, hero to villain.
When I Googled earlier today, it's told me villain to hero, but it also said any type of switch back and forth.
Gotcha. This is a Supreme Court situation where there's a lot of interpretation here. So for the points of this podcast here, I will define heel turn as villain to hero. I think that's because the opposite is a redemption, right?
No, you mean hero to villain.
Hero to villain. This is the complication, right? Someone who was heroic and then becomes villainous. So that's the heel turn. Opposite is a redemption. Someone who was a villain who becomes more heroic. Think Jerry Manthey in Heroes versus Villains, right? Someone who gets a more softer edit. So the question really is about Jenna Lewis being this person who seems so different on her second outing and much more negative in a way as a character. But like, is that something we can appreciate and enjoy? So I'm excited to kind of think about Survivor in these terms.
And I think it is really interesting to see a player come back and have a very different type of story. I think, I started watching during Cagayan. So when I saw Cambodia as my first live returnee season, I saw Tasha Fox go from a hero underdog to someone who was no longer a fan favorite, even considered a little villainous by people along the way. So I think that was, my first Survivor heel turn that I got to experience.
Yeah. And I think Tasha, just like Jenna Lewis, is someone who's really like, it's easy to root for them when they're the underdog because they're spunky and competitive and they're hardworking. They're willing to throw out strategies. But when that same person is in the overdog role, that means they can stifle a lot of the gameplay, be really cocky. And that's something that turns some people off. But I think Jenna Lewis is such an exciting heel turn figure because people forget what she was like in Borneo at times because they might remember her All-Stars appearance more. And so like that is a rebranding. Like people may not even remember your original position. But David, do you have a favorite, like let's just say character turn of some sort, whether hero to villain, villain to hero between seasons? Anything that comes to mind?
Nothing really comes immediately to mind because I don't know. It's all kind of a big, agglomeration in my head of things, and I see it as one long thread. Like when you were talking about JT and the question came up, well, should we take into account the future play when looking at the original play? And, not to go back to that question, but, it all kind of just blends together in my head. So, I think most people tend to play similarly, or at least, try to improve or redeem themselves on their future plays rather than taking that heel turn. So usually it's more a matter of editing. Like, okay, we've got a cast of returnees and they're all trying to look good. We need to make someone look not as good.
Yeah.
And I think we saw that on some of Winners at War, for example. Where it's like, wait, this person was great before, but oh no, now we're going to portray them as being kind of a jerk because we need someone to be.
Yeah.
Because that was before the new era when everybody is good and happy.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the fun to think about Jenna Lewis, because she's an old school character. And unlike, I think, modern Survivor, where it feels like everyone has a story, everyone has like such depth, everyone wants to be representation and a hero, Jenna Lewis in All Stars did not care about any of those things. And then to the point where, I mean, it's kind of crazy, but like she did not care about that. She wanted to be bold and abrasive and kind of owned that in a way. And I find it very interesting because Jerry Manthe, I think, was going into All Stars really with that redemption edit in mind. I think she wanted to be well liked. And Jenna Lewis says, who even cares about that? I'm just going to go in and shoot from the hip, hope for the best. And she got like, what, $80,000 for it. So I think it's a really interesting, figure. And I think it's fun to think about them as, it's like movies, like trilogies. It's like characters can be different in like these different eras as they return to us. And I do think, Jenna Lewis in All Stars to me is like a different side of Jenna, but like you can still see that Jenna in Borneo in my eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised when I went back to watch because, and I think it's very interesting in general for me looking at the All Stars experience because, so much of the disappointment around All Stars was our fan favorites did not make it as far as we hoped they would. But I think so many of the lower name ID people, if you will, make it far in All Stars that to me, those were a lot of the big names that I was familiar with as well. So I came in without any sort of, I think, trepidation about how my favorites were going to do because it's like, oh, well, I need to complete the Boston Rob experience. I know that he's going to be a runner up here. So I think it was really interesting then to see Jenna's origin story in Borneo. And the only things that really stuck out to me originally were the videotape from home and all of the emotion behind it. But when I went back to rewatch to help prepare, I was like, oh, All Stars Jenna was here the whole time. You can, I think, really see in some of her interactions with the Sean Kenneth summit, if you will. I think you see a lot of her attitude there. So I really enjoyed getting to see, I think, a little more of the through line than I did on my original watches of Borneo and All Stars.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right about, well, I know you are right about what happened in All Stars, about some of the lesser named characters moving forward, including the one who won. When I went back to review my old articles, I had forgotten I predicted Amber as the winner for this season. And I predicted Jenna to get Final Four. And nobody else in Reality News Online. So we had what was called a round table, and a bunch of the writers went in and made predictions about each of the different players. And I think almost nobody else had her even getting to jury because they were looking at the way she played and her ability in challenges and other things in her first season. And now, were my predictions 100% right? No, I predicted that I did say she would align with Rupert. I also said she'd align with Ethan and Tina. So it was interesting, and it was interesting for me to go back again because I was at the All Stars finale. I was there at the reunion and, went to the after party, couldn't even get close to Rob and Amber because they were so surrounded. But so it's just reliving all of that is just very interesting to do now so many years later.
Yeah, and I know we have to keep moving this along, but I need to quickly ask David, what was it like when Jerry was being booed at the All Stars? Do you recall, like, is this like a moment you really recall?
Yeah, I was booing her.
You were leading the charge.
I was among the people booing her. And I mean, looking back now, I rewatched it and I'm like, as I was rewatching the season, I'm like, well, Jerry wasn't that bad in the season, but the things that she said in the reunion really set off the audience because it was like, look at me, I'm the important one here, and you guys are taking advantage of me. And that's the way it came off. Was it the way she intended it? I don't know. And Jeff did, I don't think I think he did it in the bonus tribal council. I can't remember for sure when he did it, but he said, well, yes, you're playing, but without the audience, you're not playing. And so she was trying to make it all about her at that moment. And that's at least the way it came off. And that's what happened. And I remember at the commercial break, her getting up and leaving. And we were like, what's going on here? And yeah, I was there. I was booing. I've, Adam Klein once said something to me about, oh, what was that like? And Adam's a really nice guy, and he never would have done that. So I was like, well, Adam, actually, I was, but,
well, it's so cool to get like a firsthand account of what that was like. And then I have to ask, what was the Rob and Amber proposal then as an audience member? Does that stand out to you also, or were you in the bathroom during that?
No, I remember it, but it honestly, the booing stands out more than the proposal. Looking back, rewatching it, it does seem somewhat telegraphed. And, Jeff even said, well, did you know this was coming? And she's like, well, we talked about it, but I didn't know he was going to do it now. So yeah, it was very exciting. And like I said, at the after party, which I don't remember how I snuck into that, but, it was in various rooms and you could not even get into the room with those two. And especially since the person I had brought along was an assistant editor from Reality News Online, and she was pregnant. And so crowds and heat and all this other stuff, not her bag at that moment. And I think her son is going to college now. So,
yeah, a long time ago, but so funny just to kind of hear about that. Nigel, where are we at right now? Do we just want to start getting into the facts about Jenna?
Yeah, why don't we get a quick overview of the Jenna Lewis experience for those that have not watched her seasons recently?
Yes. So Jenna Lewis, 22-year-old student and single mother, was on the inaugural season of Survivor, which is Survivor Borneo. She was on the tragically fated Pagong tribe that was picked off after the merge by the Tagi Alliance. So Jenna ends up placing 8th there. And Jenna was most notable for not receiving her loved ones video during Survivor's first ever Loved Ones Challenge. Then 6 seasons later, she returns for Survivor All-Stars, the first ever returnee season in Survivor. And she comes in much more strategic. She kind of dominates the strategy on her starting tribe in the beginning. And she actually makes it all the way to the final 3 right before Rob wins the final immunity and chooses his future wife over Jenna Lewis. And Jenna becomes the final juror. So that's kind of Jenna's 2 seasons. It's, I think, very different stories, but a lot to dig into.
So, David, do you have any top moments or perhaps even just pieces of Jenna's story that stand out to you that maybe you really enjoy or were just very memorable to you?
I mean, the top moment, of course, is the videos.
Did you cry?
I did not cry. I mean, I am, I have shed many a tear at the loved ones visit. Don't get me wrong, but at that moment, I was like, "How could they not send it in? What are they doing here?" And so, and then after that, for her, they're all watching Greg's video, and she's back out there at the, at the archery, just shooting away, and the way that, that moment and the way it was shot, even, was etched in my mind in terms of Jenna. Another moment, of course, is Jenna saying, hey, there might be an alliance. Oh no, they said there isn't one, so we don't have to worry about that. And then, like all of Pagong, not doing anything.
Yeah, totally hear that. And I remember when I showed Nigel Borneo for the first time, and it's the Jenna Lewis. She doesn't even go home that episode, but to me, it's like the Jenna Lewis episode, which is the loved ones. And Greg wins the challenge because Jenna misses the archery. And right before we get that segment, we get all about Jenna, missing her kids. So they're totally priming us as the audience. And then it gets to the moment, Greg wins the challenge, and then they keep cutting to Greg laughing, and then like Jenna hurting herself on the arrow. It's so dramatic. And I remember when she hit the bullseye afterwards, Nigel went, it was like such a
big dramatic gasp.
Emotional, like, oh my God. Like I think it's one of the best like edited scenes, like segments that they've ever done. I thought it was so powerful, and it's something that really does stick with me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think, unfortunately for Jenna, she actually does get a good amount of content in Borneo, but she's kind of dwarfed by people who the story focuses on more. But she has this moment that is so visceral and emotional that I think really helps humanize her and kind of remind you that these are all people with lives at home, and all of this is a very real experience for them. So, I love the emotion of it, but I think my all-time favorite Jenna experience on the show is her alliance with Rupert that he seems to be dedicated to and regretful of the entire time. And I there's something that I love about Rupert just not being happy that he's in this duo, but recognizing he is in this duo.
Yeah, he says something along the lines with, "I'm very sorry I have an alliance with Jenna Lewis."
Yeah.
Like, Rupert, you don't have to be in one if you don't want to be.
But he does. That's Rupert's whole personality is he made a promise, he's going to stick to it. And that's one thing that made him so popular. That's one thing that got him $1 million. I mean, everybody knew as soon as it was announced that there would be this America's Tribal Council. I mean, even rewatching it, you could hear a number of the other players go, "Oh, Rupert." And, I remember Rob Sesternino tried, pushing, "Okay, everybody vote for me," and he emailed people and said, "Okay, everybody, we got to vote for me." And it's just, it was overwhelmingly always going to be Rupert.
Yeah. Imagine if he had that high voter turnout in that Indiana governor election he ran in. Like Rupert could have had a very different, his ability to turn out voters and get people to support him, didn't translate to his political
career. If only Rupert had run right after All-Stars here.
That was his chance. He could have been our first reality TV president in a way, if you think about it through that lens. And what I will say about Jenna also, because we talk about the Rupert thing, is I find Jenna to be super obnoxious in the best way possible, by the way. Like, I think you can find someone annoying and also find them intriguing.
Yes.
But like Jenna, like she talks about Rupert and it's like, Rupert's like one of the biggest legends at the show at that point. And Jenna is not, comparatively, but Jenna talks as if she is. And so there's a moment where she says, it's not that Rupert's bad at the game. It's that he just needs a little, coaching. I'm like, Jenna, like, that's so like self-righteous of you. Like, but that's kind of her MO, I think.
It is, but also remember, they'd only seen 3 episodes of Rupert's season at that point. They knew nothing more about him other than, he stole the shoes. He did a few other things, and he was enough of a character to make it to All-Stars. So now, that said, I do think Jenna would have been a better coach for him than him when it came to playing the game. Because I remember that line too, and I was like, she's not wrong.
I know, right? And I think that's the hard part about Jenna is that, like, I think she's actually brutally honest in a way where she is actually right a lot of the time. And because we don't like her as much, we tend not to like even want to hear it. But I do think she's honest at times. My favorite Jenna Lewis moment is her boot episode in Borneo. I think it's one of my favorite episodes of all time. It's the alphabet strategy is what kills Jenna, J for Jenna, which, Jeff editorializes before he turns over her vote. I think it's so fascinating because this is a moment where the Pagongs are trying to rally something at least, but they don't really have the numbers unless they have Sean and Kelly to join them, which never was going to happen. So like, you're seeing this kind of like our underdogs maybe getting something underneath and then it totally falling flat. And I remember when they learn about the alphabet strategy, Sean goes, well, if Jenna's going to go home, I won't vote for her because I don't want to. I don't want to do anything that would cause that. And Jenna and Colleen, when they hear about the alphabet strategy, go, we're changing our names to Zoe and Zelda.
Yeah.
So we're at the end of the alphabet. And of course, Sean votes for Jenna and Kelly defects, but like Rich, Sue, and Rudy can just piggyback on Sean's vote. That's 4 out of 8. That's a plurality. And they're able to kind of sail through the day. I remember thinking it was such an innovative strategic move on the parts of the Toggies. And at the same time, such a tragic loss of Jenna, who was really a rootable character because she has so much like chutzpah in Survivor. And like, I remember her eating the dog food her and Gretchen ate the dog food that was delivered to them. Like Jenna goes all in everything. And that includes eating dog food, telling Rupert that he needs to be better at the game, you know, just like crying about the loved ones. Like she's like fully intense. And I think if you can appreciate someone doing that, you can appreciate Jenna Lewis.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to bring up, you mentioned that they didn't have the numbers unless there were defectors. There was a point, of course, when they did. And, you know, I had to go to my Survivor book here.
Yes.
And so this, you know, was Mark Burnett wrote and said that if the people on the bubble were Sean, Greg, Jenna, Jervis, and Colleen, if they could somehow band together, they would be able to vote off Richard or Sue, thus destroying the alliance. Instead, they backed off from that challenge and chose to victimize themselves. Jenna couldn't say enough bad things about people Sue instructed her to speak ill of. When Sean, Jervis, and Colleen walked to far water, I don't know where that was, they didn't use the time alone as Tagi might have to plot strategy. Instead, they bitched and moaned about how unfair the alliance was. And then it just goes on from there. So Jenna was portrayed, at least by Mark Burnett, in this situation as kind of a tool of Sue. And, you know, instead of bringing the Pagong together, she was helping to split them apart.
Yeah, it took us several days because also at the final, so of course at final 10, the Pagong split all the votes at the 4-1-1, etc. vote. Then at the next round, Jenna joins the Toggies to vote for Greg, but like Greg, Colleen, and Jervis all vote for Jenna, so it's like you're useless. And then in the next vote's the Jenna boot, where we do see the barbecue alliance starting to form, but like they were totally outplayed, outwitted, and outlasted, I guess, you know, to borrow a familiar term.
Yes.
And but I do think the producers saw something in Jenna, because that's why they brought her back. And I think she proved that she could be a vicious strategic game player, if not a well-liked one. So definitely an interesting angle.
And, you know, David, part of the excerpt that you read that stood out to me was Mark Burnett mentioning that the Toggies would have taken advantage of the opportunity of walking away to strategize in the way that the Pagongs were not. What I think is kind of interesting to think about that we can never actually get an answer on is that we have the two tribes in Borneo. One tribe does fall into alliance strategy, and the others are enjoying the ride a little bit more for what it is. But I do wonder, you know, I think that sometimes the Pagongs get credit because it was the first season and how are they supposed to know where this was going? But if we had, let's say, the Australia cast in Borneo, where they had no prior seasons to watch, would most tribes end up at a alliance strategy anyways, or would it have been more common to have a Pagong experience where it really would take seeing an alliance be active to really learn the lesson and want to take that strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think at Pagong you had people who were actively against alliances, and that was the problem. Because at Tagi, you know, Rich didn't come up with this himself. Stacy came up with the idea for an alliance. Kelly came up with the idea for an alliance. Rich said at one point, I don't even have to do anything. I was planning on doing it, but you know, it's forming on its own. And Rudy and Sean were against it for moral reasons. Rudy looked around, realized, okay, forget about that, I'm doing it. Dirk, he was kind of clueless, and you know, Sean again, just, you know, I don't think that's the right thing to do, but he wasn't in a position of power. On Pagong, you had Gretchen, who was looked up to, Greg, who was looked up to, and they were anti-alliance. You know, they were more, this is a survival game and we should vote based on that. And I do think if you shuffle the deck a little bit, things would have been very different. But I think it came from kind of the top that, no, we're not going to do this. And you still have that debate. I mean, on Stars on Mars, they're still having a debate about alliances, you know, and there's not even, as far as we know, $1 million prize at the end of that. But there's still, you know, some of them are like, oh, we should have alliances. No, we shouldn't. And that's 23, 24 years later. So I do think that they were always going to show up. If something had happened and they didn't show up in the first season, they would have shown up in the second season.
Yeah. And I think Big Brother 1 is a good example of that, because I don't think we see alliances really formed there, but we see by the second season that people are here to kind of like understand that. In fact, I think the strategy in early Survivor and early Big Brother, early reality television, I thought was so fascinating to watch, because people are learning a game and there's so much little information that they're all perfecting it. Now it's like everyone's an expert, which I think kind of takes away from a lot of the innovation at times, because people were starting to figure out, we don't have to go with the majority. We can actually flip the game. And it was really fun to see people do that. And think for Jenna Lewis, it's interesting how she sees the game as someone, because I think after the merge, she also mentions, the people, she wants to align with the women. So she's like a tool by Sue, as David had said. So she sees that like, maybe I can weasel my way into an alliance. She's kind of like one of the people who wants to do that. And so I feel like she definitely has like angles and direction, but like at the end of the day, she has like a 12-day delay to starting the game in the way the Toggies kind of had prepared. And I think the Toggies created a culture where that was really valued and the Pagongs did not. So I think that also speaks to how culture is kind of like developed within groups. So it's very interesting to me.
Yeah. As I was rewatching, I saw, and I think one of you said it earlier, the core of a strategic Jenna was there. It was there, and it was just starting to grow throughout the first season. But then at the end of the game, she had some sort of like, it was a jury speaks type segment, and she then said she was happy to be voted out when she was, because she can't even lie, because people would see right through her. And it's like, well, you were starting to grow and then you lost it, but then she regained it. I will say, Jenna does have a very, very important distinction. She was the first one to ever utter the words voting block on Survivor. So it was episode 8 when she was discussing Toggy. So any claims you might hear on this podcast network from some other podcast host who might say that he came up with voting blocks, no.
Good point. And we can say that they really follow Jenna Lewis's footsteps, actually.
Yeah, that's
Jenna
right.
Lewis, the strategic force that is Jenna Lewis.
Yes.
Now, David, did you like Jenna when you watched her in Borneo? Were you a fan? Were you excited for her at All Stars? Like, is she's someone who grew on you? Like, what's your relationship with Jenna as a figure?
I would say it's very difficult to remember back to the original Borneo, and there wasn't a community as such then. I mean, lots of people were talking to each other like friends face to face. I know, a weird idea. But there wasn't social media. There was, people wrote articles. I wrote articles and I put them out there, and there they were. They were out there. And, there was no real ongoing discussion of the same type originally. And so it's hard to kind of go back to that place. I think I was probably like almost everybody else thinking, oh my gosh, these Pagong people are dumb. Why can't they get it together? That was kind of the way everybody was looking at it. When it moved into All Stars, I don't remember the overall opinion on whether she deserved it or not. I think a lot more people were focused on Amber. Really? Amber's an all-star? Do we even remember Amber? And so in that roundtable article that I mentioned, there wasn't really any discussion of why is she here. And so it's hard to kind of go back and figure that out. I think it was more, we wish that these other people were here, but okay, Jenna's here. I don't remember as many people questioning her as questioning Amber.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And for me, I loved Colleen. I was a kid. Of course, I loved Colleen back in Borneo. Like she's like a Disney character. She's like peppy. She like is kind of a
very spunky.
She's spunky and she's small. It's like I loved her, right? And so I didn't remember Jenna Lewis that much, just because Colleen had taken all my attention. And it's not like you could, watch the show so
You
often,
couldn't
like you
stream
can
it.
now, right?
Yeah.
To like watch all the top moments or anything. So Jenna didn't stand out to me very much then. By All Stars, I hated Jenna. I hated Jenna. And I will say today, this is a character appreciation podcast, so it's not like we try to be super negative or anything.
Yeah.
That I would say I love to hate Jenna now. So there's a love angle to this because I think Jenna is very frustrating at times, but I can't deny that I think she is pretty good television. She really harkens to early reality television to me, and I have a lot of reverence for that.
Mhm.
And I remember disliking her so much with her against Sheehan because I loved Sheehan. And
Yes.
I especially hated her at the premiere in All Stars because like she was so anti-winner. She said the winners don't deserve to be here. I thought it was so unfair. I thought it was so wrong that Jenna would not even give them a chance. But now that I kind of look back and think about it, 20 years later almost, and now we have all this wealth inequality and it's like eat the rich and the submarine. And I'm kind of like, you know what? Maybe we should give Jenna Lewis credit for saying things like, you know what? The rich aren't going to get richer on my watch. she's a working class icon. Jenna Lewis stood out and wasn't afraid to be a villain for saying that no one deserves a second $1 million. And I kind of appreciate that in retrospect, even though I found it very frustrating at the time. So I think I have this like really appreciation from Jenna now as someone who's been away, but I remember really disliking her then. So it's kind of fun to like revisit it because she still kind of gets my blood to boil at times, but I'm also like, at least she makes me feel something. So I have this really complex relationship with Jenna.
Yeah. And, because I watched so many seasons out of order, I don't have that blood boiling experience for Jenna. I'm sure that we were all devastated when Tina was voted out so early, but I had already seen her time on Blood versus Water by the time
You're like, I've seen her voted out twice. What's the big deal?
So much of that I had already been desensitized to. So for me, I think that I loved watching Jenna because of the audacity. Kevin, I think, gave me a lot of background on personal relationships and dynamics that were at play during All Stars that you wouldn't necessarily know about just from watching. So I knew that she had, I believe, like casually dated Ethan Zahn at one point. So to see her there kind of toying with Ethan's life, being like, yeah, we might give you a reprieve this time, Ethan, where it's like realizing that's her ex-boyfriend. This is, the original Michelle versus Wendell of it all, right? Yeah. But to see the way that she is reveling in all of that, I think is just audacity. And that I think is really fun in a television character.
Yeah. And you actually are one of the people that likes Jenna more than Colleen and Borneo. A rare take, I feel like.
Yeah, this is true. And, I think it's because I am through and through a millennial. I have that millennial, can-do, very enthusiastic spirit within me. And I think that Colleen is a little bit more of like a classic Gen Xer of a little bit of like an apathy of like, whatever, man, it's all dumb. Who cares? And so that I don't quite connect with quite as much. If I'd watched her as a kid, I'm sure I would have had a different point of view on her, but I was just so moved by Jenna and the videotape and the shocking, first shot bullseye after losing the challenge.
And Jenna Lewis is competitive, right? So if you watch, it's actually very interesting with Nigel and myself that I've always thought about Survivor as a social experiment, but because Nigel came in so much later, he's always said, well, it's a competition first and foremost. Like that's not even part of his analysis. And I think if you think about it just as a competition, Jenna Lewis is competitive. She's intense. She puts it all out there. Her hair gets singed the first day in like All Stars because she gets her head up in there trying to blow into the smoke to make fire.
Yes.
Like she cannot help but like throw herself into every single situation at times, like a spastic crazy person.
And speaking of spastic, what also stood out to me when watching some of the All Stars challenges is how like all over the place Jenna is. She's like bursting with energy in a way that seems counterproductive to the challenges.
Yeah. I agree. She's like everywhere all at once, but
and I of course fell even back then squarely in the strategic, it's a game standpoint of things. So her coming in and saying the winners cannot win again no matter what, I don't care if they played the best. I wasn't real happy with that. I mean, she flat out said it. And then she told Ethan that. She said, which of course, huge violation of my rule too. You don't tell people what you're planning to do. And she was lucky that Ethan and Tina couldn't get anyone on their side. But even so, not a good move. And, then to further say, to Jeff Probst and Tribal Council, that she couldn't think of any scenario where she would vote for the winner, based on that $1 million. I mean, what about other people? Other people, I'm sure, were doing things, Jerry had been doing some Playboy and other modeling. I'm sure she got pretty good checks for those, and Jenna Maraska, when, she had done the same. And so
that Jenna Lewis she could be a bit of a hypocrite, right? Like that's kind of I think the problem.
Right. And then by the second Tribal Council, I noticed that she modified her stance a little bit. It wasn't just, because they have the $1 million. It was, well, then it's because they're a threat. They won once, so obviously they know how to play the game, so that makes them, more of a threat. And it's like, okay, did you sit down and think about how this was going to look and decide to modify it a little bit? Because I wrote in my recap about, you talked about how she said, well, they don't deserve to be here. And I made a joke about Jenna wishing the season were Survivor no stars. You can't have all stars and not have any winners. I'm sorry, Jenna.
Yeah. I mean, I totally hear what you're saying. And I just think, I kind of feel like if you think of the lens of, Jenna Lewis was on Borneo and she was like a lamb led to the slaughter, a cutthroat game that she was walking herself into. And she goes, well, the winners are going to see a cutthroat game with no mercy in the way that I felt like in Borneo. And I feel like that's kind of a way to see Jenna Lewis as this kind of through line. And now that we've had two-time winners, it doesn't hurt me as bad that like if I rewatch All Stars, I'm not nearly as offended at Jenna Lewis like going after the winners, because it then made Sandra's win so much more exciting, 12 seasons later or so. So I think I'm kind of glad that Jenna like made a stake in the game, because I remember Danny Boatwright refused to do a returnee season unless it was all winners, because she remembered All Stars being so anti-winner. And guess what? She still went on him early, because there's so much to Survivor than just being a winner. But I think Jenna Lewis having such strong opinions really gave us stuff to chew on. She made us feel things. And I think if, she's certainly not a bland person by any means,
I like the idea of All Stars episode 1 Jenna demanding tax returns from everybody to help determine who she's going to allow to stay in the game and who needs to be sent out early.
Yeah, she's like, well, how many deductions are you taking? I need to like validate all of this. It's so funny.
I mean, it's not the first time that, money has come up. It came up in Thailand, like, oh, we don't want this rich guy, and then the wealthier people saying, well, I'm not going to talk about my sports car and it is, I mean, it's come up before. Where we only have to look at Mike White and Nick Wilson, and I mean, we don't want to look at Nick Wilson, but other times it's come up where it's like, well, we could give it to the person who is going to, need it more and make a better use of it, we think, or we can, give it to this person who already has money. And again, this, the person who's focused on strategy and gaming in me really doesn't like that. That shouldn't come into play, but everything comes into play.
Yeah. And that's what makes it the social experiment of it all, right? That at the end of the day, people have different value systems, and that's always going to impact the game in one way or
another. And before we move on to our segment where we talk about kind of like the research that I was able to find on Jenna, I want to mention that what I like about Jenna Lewis is that she has the audacity to be wrong about so many things. She is committed to like putting her foot in her mouth, standing up, believing something, because Jenna Lewis is also one of the first people to ever not vote correctly at the final tribal council. She votes she dissents both times. And if there's anything that's truly Jenna Lewis to me, it's having the audacity to dissent no matter what. She will always speak her mind.
So before you go on, you raised one more thing that I wanted to bring up. You talk about putting her foot in her mouth and standing her ground. And really, one of the things for possible most memorable moment, to go back to that, is not standing her ground and not keeping her foot where it should have been in that final immunity challenge, because she lifted it by that much. And, it reminds me that these days in baseball, with instant replay, we'll see a situation where someone slides into second and they bounce a little bit. and the tag is on them while they're, you know, a fraction of an inch off the bag, and they're called out. And Survivor Instant Replay they were 15 years ahead of baseball because she moved her foot just a fraction of an inch off that post, and she was out.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I had never been more okay with a Romber fight. You know, we had been weeks. We were like, someone needs to take them down. And then at the end, it was a kind of exciting to say the comeuppance of people who chose not to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, get
Right.
that. So I think Jenna Lewis is actually a really fun character, as she's a villain in the way that Katie Gallagher is a villain, right? Like in a sense that she's kind of an irritant in the way we're supposed to perceive her. But I think it also can make her a fun villain at times because, you know, at the end of the day, she's never going to actually win, but she has a lot of power in her hands, and she will receive the ire of people later. So you can kind of, enjoy some of that. So Nigel, I did find some stuff on the internet about how Jenna Lewis is currently perceived, and then we'll go into how she was historically perceived. And of course, we have someone who was there at the time in David to kind of give his analysis too.
Fantastic. So what did you find?
So I found some Reddit articles. That was the first place to look at some Survivor discourse. I found a thread called, "Am I the only one who liked Jenna Lewis on All Stars?"
There are two of us. Thank you very much.
So it was kind of a question about like, why did people not like her? Because it may be hard for people to remember why. So one of the top comments is, "I could be wrong, but I think a lot of the initial hate was that she led the anti-winners movement and caused a domino effect that resulted in an awful boot order." Someone else mentioned, "I didn't mind Jenna until she started fighting with Shan. It was infuriating because Shan was obviously in the right about everything, and Jenna was just straight up delusional. At that point, I was eager to see her lose and get a comeuppance."
Was that your comment? Are you reading your own Reddit?
It may be like a shadow account of some sort when I get very angry, and I'm definitely channeling that. And then I also found one again about the heel turn aspect of Jenna. There was a meme where it's Jenna in season 1. It's a picture of Snow White. Jenna in season 8, and it's a picture of the evil queen from Snow White. So hero to villain. And a comment I liked on this is someone goes, "Stephanie LaGrossa be like." So I think Stephanie is probably a good like heel turn
Another
example
very famous heel
from
turn.
hero to villain, because now underdog.
Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah,
underdog to like overdog, and can be a little harder to accept.
And that's always going to be the risk of returning after getting a really positive underdog edit, is that, are you going to be that lucky twice that production gives you a very flattering edit? Not everyone gets to be that lucky.
Right.
And so also someone said that, she's actually underrated on both seasons. The anti-winner thing is an annoying thing from a fan's point of view, but it worked. She was successful. And I think actually probably to acknowledge here that the only winner Jenna gets rid of is Tina. She's not part of anything else. And it's like, I do think that other players were probably targeting their winner. Like Rich was still dead on arrival, whether Jenna had a role in that or not. But I think Jenna is a really good focal point because she's the loudest about it. So you can kind of peg it easily on her from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Rich being a focal point makes sense. He was the leader of the alliance. He is schemy. He is everything you think of in that regard. Tina, not so much. Even Ethan, not so. And that's one of the things that Ethan was trying to make his case was, "You've seen me. I am a man of my word. I will do this." And I know Rich, always said, "I played as ethically as I could," but a lot of people were like, "Yeah, but you were schemy." So I can see Rich being targeted for being Rich a lot more than I can see Tina and Ethan being targeted for who they were.
Yeah. And you know what I will say, because I think you totally make a good point. It made sense for Rich to be targeted because he's the architect of like strategy at the time. But like Tina and Ethan don't seem to be a reason targeted against them. But in my devil's advocate viewing, I always remember feeling a little frustrated that Tina and Ethan's, their strategy to appeal to Rupert and Rudy is that like, us, the game we play, we're very honorable people. But like, and you know who Jenna and Jerry are, and they're very different than that. But if you actually kind of sift through the actual experiences, Jenna and Jerry never betrayed anyone in their seasons, but Tina and Ethan did. But Tina and Ethan get the heroic edit, so it's easier to. So it's like they were justified in those things. Where Jenna and Jerry, who for all intents and purposes, never played a vicious game. I mean, maybe Jerry with the beef jerky, perhaps, but like they weren't doing anything like that. But like the way they go about things, their character, and they can observe that is an angle to view them through.
Hey, Tina didn't betray anybody, just Jerry.
No one
Right?
cared
Does
about.
that even count?
That was actually a public service that she did by getting rid of that horrible Jerry Manthe, you know? So I think it's fun to kind of see it through those lens. And then I also, from my Reddit research here, I also noticed that a lot of people say, I thought she was a little obnoxious in All Stars, but I don't remember her a whole lot in Borneo. And I think that also speaks to Jenna as someone who I do feel like she's rebranded so much in the way that there are other people like Kelly Wentworth, where people might forget that she has a much smaller edit in her first time because people are so linked to her second time. You know, and maybe there's some other people in Survivor history that are kind of like that, where their first iterations feel very different or even forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just from the Pagongs that make the merge, I think certainly Greg, Colleen, and Jervis really stand out in my mind as these big, unique characters that, you know, even though Jenna gets a moment that stands out, I think when you think of the season as a whole, she does not feel as relevant as some of her other Pagongs that she's out there with.
Yeah.
I mean, because I remember it was like, why is she here? Colleen should be here instead. and I think that she had that stigma against her. But David, do you remember? I don't know if it was like the Australian, like they did that special episode in the Australian Outback. They do. I think they flash back home to people.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it's a kind of like a fun episode. Like I think Mitchell sings and stuff.
Is this where Mad Dog Hershey like reveals that she's in a bikini from that like
yes, in like
giant fur that she's wearing?
Yes, that is the moment I'm talking about. Okay, so they have where Jeff says, you know, we'll get even the takes of the first season people on this. And I remember like Rudy mentioning how they were stupid to build into like a dry riverbed. Like, what were they thinking? So they have these moments. And there's a moment where Jeff in his voiceover says, and everyone's a fan of Elizabeth Hasselbeck, right? Cuts to Jenna immediately hinting at her future villain. And you go like, ugh, Elizabeth always crying all the time. Like she's like so like mean in a way. And that feels so different than the Jenna that we got in Borneo, but is much closer to the Jenna we get in All Star. So I think it's like an early hint to like the Jenna that we will get to know. Yeah. I also found a popularity poll from Reddit in 2016 that ranked the two Jenna outings. So David, I want to ask you, which Jenna do you think is more popular? Borneo Jenna or All Stars Jenna?
When was this poll taken?
2016. So this is around like co-wrong time.
I'm gonna go with Borneo Jenna.
Okay. And is Borneo Jenna your preferred Jenna?
No, I think that All Stars Jenna
is more because she's the better game player. Is that?
Yeah, she's actually playing. You know.
Yeah. Okay. And Nigel, what do you think?
I think the fans do not love what she did in All Stars. I love what she did in All Stars. So I have the same answers as David.
So yeah, you both are more pro All Stars Jenna. So yes. Jenna Borneo is the higher ranked Jenna. Jenna Borneo ranks in the 44th percentile. So she's a kind of middling overall. Jenna Lewis All Stars ranks in the 80th percentile. So she's bottom 20%, bottom quintile actually. And just some things I also noticed from this popularity poll, because they gave us like correlations in data. Who did you like and who was similar to people you liked? So Jenna Lewis Borneo has high positive correlations with Laura Moret, Samoa, Eliza Orleans, Vanuatu, and Penny Ramsey, Thailand. Any reactions to this, David? Does this mean anything to you?
The Eliza one is interesting because I do think there's, you know, a little bit of Eliza. Now, we obviously got to know Eliza a lot better. I think there's a little, you know, she's kind of a proto Eliza.
I think so. And I actually think all three of these people were like kind of like targeted there were people who were like vocal detractors of them in some way. Like Shambo is a vocal detractor of Laura. A one-sided feud, if you ask me, at times. Eliza had a lot. I mean, everyone was annoyed with Eliza all the time in Vanuatu. She was totally a pariah. And, you know, Sheehan was a huge, hated Penny. And so I think it's like again, these are like kind of maybe plucky people, and maybe that's kind of like what it's appealing to.
A little opinionated.
You know, I think is valued here. Jenna Lewis All-Stars, highly correlated with Andrea Belke, Redemption Island, Ashley Underwood, Redemption Island, and Natalie Tenorelli, Redemption Island. So I think it's just, do you like people who support Boston Rob? I think that's probably are you on the Boston Rob bandwagon? Then you probably like Jenna Lewis All-Stars. Nigel, is that surprising you?
It is surprising to me, but I think you made a very clear link between all of the people that were listed here.
Yeah.
And as you know, as you started to read Andrew, I was like, oh, you know, maybe it's the returnee women who are pretty strategic coming out. But you also mentioned Natalie Tenorelli. So I was like, okay, well, it's not that.
Yeah, I think that's probably just one angle. In All-Stars, Jenna is ranked 16th out of 18th on this popularity poll. So only 2 people ranked below her. David, any guesses on who the subreddit disliked more than Jenna Lewis in 2016?
Well, let's see here. If she was 3rd place and came 3rd from the bottom, I'm going to go with 1st and 2nd place for the bottom 2.
So you think Rob and Amber are the lowest ranked people from the subreddit's perspective?
I think it's possible, yeah.
Okay. Nigel, do you want to take any guesses here?
You know, I think what's like a little difficult is that it's from the comments you've shared in your research, it seems like people strongly dislike Jenna. So it's like, who else did people come out upset with from All-Stars?
Oh, that's a good point.
And that I feel like I actually have like a little bit of a harder read on, because I'm very team Romber. So I feel like I'm off of the mainstream of what the thoughts are on the All-Stars. So I'm going to go with, let's say like Jerry. People booed her at the reunion. And let's just say Lex, because I thought he was very hypocritical when he, you know, told Ethan, you're going to go home. Sorry. It is what it is. And then gets mad when Boston Rob does it to him.
All right. Both great guesses. The only 2 people ranked lower than Jenna Lewis is Alicia Calloway and Sue Hawk. So they, and I wonder if it's because, you know, they were scoring people out of 1 out of 10. So maybe Sue and Alicia just are not getting a lot of 10s. They're getting kind of like just like slightly low. A lot of, you know, I'm very sympathetic to Sue, but I think there was a lot of people who found her outbursts to be not appreciated and held that against her at times.
Yeah, I think. Not to go off on a big tangent. Rewatching the Sue situation, the Sue and Rich situation, very different than when I watched it the first time. And I didn't delve into my recaps because I was Jenna focused, but to see, okay, what were we saying at that time? But even watching it on Paramount Plus, like the original episode is fine and intact, but they had one of those, you know, flashback episodes. It cut out that entire situation, and it had a you know, come up at the beginning. It said this episode has been edited for legal reasons. And so I think, I think that her, you know, whether it was her lawsuit or whatever agreement they came to, but it was interesting, like, why keep it in the original episode, but not in the flashback episode? I don't know, but I think people were not at all happy with Sue at that time. So again, it comes back to when that Reddit poll was done.
Yeah. And what people remember, because, you know, it's like, maybe I didn't watch a season a long time ago, but they still are like in my memory. And so when I'm scoring people, it's kind of the first thing I think about. And I remember, you know, because I was so pro Sheehan at the time, I was very anti Alicia, and all the people that just like let Romber have their majority, you know. And so like, I think I also probably would have put Jenna Lewis over Alicia. And I actually have a soft spot for Alicia, I think, at the end of the day. But at least, like, I think Jenna delivered in All-Stars, where I don't know if Alicia did, you know?
I think Alicia is an interesting person to rank below her, because I'm a big Alicia fan. I really love negative tone characters. That's absolutely my thing. But I have a feeling that Alicia kind of doesn't give anybody what they're looking for in All-Stars, because to your point, she's not super strategic and kind of allows a bit of a cakewalk to the end, is not putting up any sort of resistance when she's the next in line when Shan wins immunity, right? She's not very positive on the season either. I don't think she's like very funny. She does get into arguments, which I enjoy, but I recognize not a lot of people may rank you high because of those moments as well.
Yeah, I don't think most people are not coming out of All-Star saying Alicia was my favorite person.
Yes.
Some people might have actually thought Jenna Lewis could have been their favorite because, you know, she kind of takes the game by the horns and maybe they're anti, you know, wealth. But like, I think Sue and Alicia probably are not a lot of people's like number one favorites. I'm sure that tanked them in this ranking. Yeah. I also found data from closer to the time of All-Stars to see kind of how the fans received people then. We have this book called Tribal Warfare, Survivor, and the Political Unconsciousness or Unconscious of Reality Television. And I've referenced this before, and it's some researcher had done like a polling of the first 10 seasons and had everyone be ranked. But unlike the Reddit poll, you don't have like individual iterations. So like Boston Rob is collective Boston Rob. It's not, you're going to get two different Boston Robs in this. Jenna Lewis ranked in the 35th percentile, which is strangely very popular for considering how unlike she is on the internet in 2016 or closer to today. More recently. She ranks above Kristen Vanuatu, Rob, and Amber. And David, I don't know if you recall this or can validate this for me. At the America's Final Tribal Council, it's 4 men who are the top vote getters. I think Rupert, Tom, Boston, Rob, and what, Colby?
Colby, yep.
Yeah, so that sounds right. And I think they revealed that Jenna Lewis might have been the highest voter as out of the women, which always shocked me. But I think maybe we could have been like dealing with like slivers of data because so many people voted for Rupert. Does this ring any bells to you?
Yeah, I don't remember, even having just recently rewatched, I don't remember them mentioning Jenna being that. I do remember like, oh, 4 men is the top. Yeah, that's classic.
That's America.
Yeah. But I do think that, yeah, it was slivers at that point, like you said.
Yeah. But, you know, I do think that Jenna, because, you know, she's ranked very high here in this. And I wonder if, you know, the people who hated Jenna the most are the people that thought the anti-winner rhetoric was crap and unfair. But I wonder if the casuals felt the same, like the true casuals, not the people who were going on reality news online or talking about it, like just like, you know, water cooler people tuning in. I'm sure a lot of them agreed with Jenna. Like, why would the winners? Like, that's so unfair. I remember when Kelly Wigglesworth, I think, did an interview on like Survivor Oz or something, and she was asked, which winner do you think did not deserve it? And, you know, Kelly Wigglesworth did not keep up with the show, so she can't name anything. And someone mentions that Sandra's won twice, and she goes, oh, I don't know if anyone should win twice. Like, that's like a mentality of a lot of people who are watching for a kind of the camping adventure aspect. So I do actually think Jenna is probably more popular with casuals than with internet fans, kind of like Rupert, if you will, but not nearly as popular.
Not to the same degree.
Right.
But I do think maybe that Jenna is more popular than maybe super fans give her credit for.
Yeah, I think that's certainly possible. And, you know, to the point that she may be the most popular woman from All Stars in that vote, you know, in thinking the women who make the merge, it's Amber, Jenna, Sheehan, Alicia, and Kathy, correct?
Yeah.
I don't think America particularly loved Amber at times, Sheehan, or Alicia. Kathy's probably a little more positive, but even then there's like mixed in like negative toning because of the way that it breaks down with Boston Rob. So Jenna feels maybe the most different from these people, where she's just, you know, really strategically moving forward and everybody else can give a lot of people something to complain about, perhaps.
And, you know, you're giving $1 million and Jenna Lewis wanted it the most. You know, like maybe that's like... I mean,
there is another aspect. There were 2 Jennas.
And
one of them left to go, you know, be with her dying mother. Depending on how you voted, if you were a casual, did you remember which Jenna it was?
I think that's actually a great point. You know, I mean, Kelly Wentworth talks about the fact that she thinks it mattered in the Cambodia vote that she was one of the only blondes.
She stands out
in like a younger group because just visually she is maybe a little more recognizable than a bunch of brunettes next to each other.
It's like when you vote for school board and you're like, this name's the best one. You know, it's like it's going to be low information.
Yeah, I used to do a Why Blank Lost for American Idol. And one of the rules there was you have to be different from the other singers. And we saw that with several times where there would be, 3 singers who were very similar. And even though they were all very good and all popular, one of them would end up getting voted out. And you'd be like, well, what just happened there? Well, they were splitting the vote. And, it's, you need to stand out. Or in this case, I guess it helped her to not split the vote.
Yeah. Well, maybe this tells us that Jenna Lewis could have done surprisingly well on like Big Brother, like the UK version of Big Brother, where the public votes more, which is kind of crazy because again, I found her so unlikable, but like, I think she resonates with at least some people, right? Like, and I find that very interesting.
I think that Jenna Lewis maybe does a little bit better if the public is voting by like calling a number a la American Idol. I think if you have to like in 2023 open an app and vote, I don't know that Jenna gets quite as many votes as like the phone call.
So I also found Jenna Lewis's pre-season like all-stars assessment from Mario Lanza, another early
Survivor intelligentsia.
Yeah, like elites, if you will, driving all of our opinions. And so he writes about Jenna Lewis. I'll say this, and I would love to get everyone's reactions. Jenna Lewis, I expect great things from Jenna this season. And I know I've said this over and over before, but it really needs to be mentioned again. The first season players should be judged completely different than players from other seasons. The players in Borneo had no idea what they were getting into. Half of them didn't even figure out it was a game show until it was far too late. And I think Jenna was a prime example of this. I think she could have been a fantastic player in any other season. After all, she's spunky, she's competitive, she's kind of vicious. And in parentheses, he mentions, read the Burnett book. He talks about how the producers expected her to be the villain that season. Oh, and she's a bundle of energy who's a hard worker and will be useful around camp. Add in the fact that Jenna will never be seen as a threat by anyone in All Stars, and I can almost guarantee she's going to do well. Above all else, I am really glad that Jenna got to play again. One of the original survivors, and a Pagong at that, finally gets a chance to write herself a new Survivor legacy. Jump on the Jenna bandwagon now. She's going to be around for a while. David, reactions, because you also assumed that Jenna would go very far too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is the same reason. She wasn't seen as a threat. And I do think that was one reason she got taken along. If, Rob and Amber are looking at who they should keep around and who sticks around, it's the question of who's least likely to stab them in the back and who is less of a threat. And so, yeah, it's part of the reason. I also agree that you have to look at some of the people on the first season through a different lens. Maybe not as much as Mario said, because, you did have people like Rich who were playing the game before he even got there. And so if some people can recognize it, they all could have recognized it. But, yes, you definitely look at them differently than you look at like season 44, where, nobody in season 1 was 3D printing puzzles.
Yeah. You're definitely a grain of salt, of course. I mean, I do think that, like when, new fans watch Borneo, I think they're so surprised that people were not aware of the alliances. And I think misunderstand like how unethical it could have been perceived by people who are on national television, being representations of their community. That also plays factors in all of this. I mean, thank God Rich and that mentality won out, because I don't think Survivor lasts this long. But I think it's very interesting to like, couch some expectations, because I think it's kind of fun to see people learn the game and be horrified at the game, which I think what the Pagongs experience.
Right.
And so I think there's some fun there. Nigel, any reactions to what I read?
Well, I also think it's possible that if you brought back every player from Pagong to play on a second season, I think it's possible Jenna would be the gamiest of all of those Pagongs. And,
I think Jervis might also be up there. He brings the deck of cards, so he's like operationalizing strategy.
Yeah, that's true. Too. But I don't think that necessarily all the Pagongs would be on a spectrum of strategic. I don't think that they would all be as far as Jenna and Jervis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Greg had or has it in him. Because I think my understanding was he was in the mix to come back more recently, but couldn't, work issues wouldn't allow it. And so I would love to see a 2023 Greg.
Yeah.
But he has the intelligence, certainly, and the mind that he could play strategically. At that point in time, he was against it. He was vehemently against it. He was like, I don't want to be here if that's the way they're going to play. Well, yes, that's the way they're going to play. And the fact that he was interested in coming back means one of two things. Either he recognizes it now and he wanted to come back and, show people what he could do, or he's one of those people who's like, no, I'm going to come back and show that I was originally right and I'm still right. And I'm not going to play with alliances this time either.
Yeah, and what if that wins? What if that's the new chapter, the new era of Survivor, David? Like the Pagongs were right at the end of the day, and they'll win out. So obviously a funny.
I could imagine a scenario in which, Greg comes back and it's such an advantage heavy era that we find ourselves in now. Greg is the only one who doesn't participate in the advantages, and everybody else gets a little too complex with their gameplay, blows themselves up by getting a little too fancy, misplaying the knowledge is power, for example.
Yeah.
But David, I would also love to see Greg come back at some point in the future. Is there anyone from All Stars that you would like to see get another chance to see how they may be playing in the modern era that we might not have seen in a while?
I mean, the obvious answer is Sheehan.
I had a feeling it would be your answer.
And like you, she's one of my favorite. And so, I mean, for multiple reasons, for anyone who might not already know this, she was the first person to quote my rules on TV. So, Rob Sesternino snuck them in and studied them, but she actually quoted them. And so obviously very near and dear to my heart, but just her overall personality too. And the funny thing was, for the last, 20 years, I have thought that her quote was stupid people, stupid people, because that was the name of the title of the episode. And I have quoted that many times. And it wasn't until I listened to you guys and you said the actual quote, which is stupid people, stupid players. And I was like, oh man, they got that wrong. And then I rewatched it and I'm like, I've been quoting it wrong for the last 20 years.
It's the Darth Vader of it all. It's the Mandela effect,
yes,
right?
yeah.
Just it's so easy because I think back then they were not using quotes as often. But by the time that starts happening, we kind of assume that, and it would have been funny if I think it's a better line actually, saying stupid people multiple times versus switching it to players. I did want to mention that I also found an EW article from Dalton Ross during the Sheehan boot episode in All Stars. So as you may recall, Sheehan and Jenna have it out in Sheehan's boot episode. And there's one comment about Jenna I wanted to read to get a depiction of how people felt about Jenna at the time. And Dalton says, Rupert's rift with Jenna was interesting, but anyone who has watched even one episode of Survivor knows Jenna annoys the hell out of everyone, so it wasn't the biggest shocker. It's like Jenna cannot be not described as annoying. She wins the at the final 7, they have that slam book challenge where you all get associated, and I think she gets who doesn't shut up. Or who never shuts up, and it cuts to Jenna, of course, talking as soon as it's being revealed, and she goes, "Yeah," she totally leans into it. She's like, "Yeah, I know, I don't ever stop talking." So that was definitely Jenna's reputation at the time,
and I think that's part of Jenna's charm, is that she's aware that she's annoying, but that doesn't stop her from being herself. And I'm sure that that's also what gets her on TV in the first place, right?
Yes. And then also I have Dalton Ross from the All Stars premiere, and he actually references casting again. And, David, you mentioned casting as well when it comes to Amber, but this is a quote I have. As for the casting, all in all, I think they did a pretty good job. Yes, I would have preferred Brian or Helen from Thailand over Sheehan, and Pearl Island Sandra instead of Amber or Jenna Lewis. But it's hard to be shocked when they go with young, attractive women. I mean, that's what television people do. So Again, like a reference that Jenna Lewis was a bit more of an obscure choice, but it also like not a surprising one, considering that even in 2003, 2004, we kind of understand that TV people have a certain agenda they want to push.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that it was also good to get a Pagong representative on All Stars as well. We definitely have our Toggies there, so it is nice to get someone who is the victim of the dark gameplay, and we really do get evil Jenna rising from those ashes.
Yeah. Also in my research, David, I found your Why Jenna Lost article from All Stars. I want to read you a few lines and I'm sure get your take and kind of like talk this out a bit more. So what I have here. So with regards to the third rule, pretending to be nice, Jenna didn't do so hot. We heard from several people about how she couldn't keep her mouth shut, about how she ordered people around and told them what they could eat, etc. These are the personality issues I spoke of above, which made it difficult for others to want to be in an alliance with Jenna, even if she had entertained the possibility. Alicia, Tom, and Sheehan certainly were not big Jenna fans. Hell, even Rupert was sick of her. At one point wished he wasn't even in an alliance with her. Also, even if she wasn't interested in allying herself with them, making them enemies is not smart, in case you end up asking them to vote for you at the end. Jenna was close, and it would have been interesting to see how it turned out against Rob or Amber. And then in parentheses, you wrote, against Rupert, she would have lost easily, in part due to her personality issues. And then then I jump to the end of the column where you say, Jenna said she wanted to win it all this time, but she played like she was gunning not to win or place, but to show. She had third place all sewn up, but she had no chance at first using the strategy she relied on. Yes, that strategy was a safer way to get to the final three, but that's where it dead ended. Jenna should have foreseen the outcome and switched up to try something different and eliminate the power couple. But she took the easy way instead. The easy way coming in third, that is. And that is why Jenna lost. David, still stand by this?
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah. I actually had those same passages quoted in my notes among some other ones, but I'm like reading along as you're doing it. I'm like, oh, he picked some good ones there.
Yeah.
I mean, those were some of the things she did wrong. And she did some things right. She helped Pagong another tribe this time around.
She got one over on them finally. She got to be a Pagonger. That's kind of fun.
Right. And she knew that there was alliances. She worked on it. She, pulled people together. She took care of it. But yeah, at the end, it was just, it was the same problem that so many others had. That Rupert, Tom, they all just merrily went to the end so they could be knocked off. And she was never good at challenges. So I know she's like, oh, if only my foot hadn't slipped, I could have been there for hours. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe your foot would have slipped a different time. Or maybe they would have changed things up and you would have pulled a Rudy while walking around or something like that. I mean, I don't think Amber was going anywhere. And so, that was the thing. She had to beat two people to have, that was the only way she was winning at that point. And so then it sparked the debate of, should she have forced a Final Four rock drop? And, that's really the big question, because at that point in time, the Final Four tiebreaker was still the Purple Rock of Death. And so Jenna even explained whoever had immunity was safe and the other three drew for the Purple Rock. So Amber had won that immunity. And so there was only a 1 in 3 chance of getting Rob out. But is 1 in 3 better than 0, essentially? And the way she looked at it, she went back and forth, obviously. And because if Rupert had won if they had gotten Rob out and Rupert won final immunity, he would take her to the final 2 out of loyalty. If Amber won, she would take her out of strategy. if Jenna won, well, okay, she's there. So if she had forced the rock draw, she had a 1/3 chance of absolutely getting to final 2. And then from there, she would have lost against Rupert. She might have beaten Amber. I mean, I think there was
she does.
yeah.
You know, like I think because I know at the reunion, Jeff has like the whole raising hands. I think
Right.
Jenna does beat both Rob and Amber at the
Mhm.
end, just because Lex, Alicia, and Tom were never going to vote for either of them. So she only needs
Right.
one more vote. And I don't think it's like Kathy probably never votes for Amber. She seems really annoyed with her. So like, you know, I think there's a lot of combinations where she has her best. But I guess my perspective always was that like, I get her perspective at 4, but it's like, Jenna, you could have done something at 6. You could have, we didn't have to wait to 4 to do any of this stuff.
Right. I mean, to give Rob credit, which I don't often give Boston Rob a lot of credit, but to give him credit, he did what he needed to do to keep people fighting with each other. You know, now part of that was Jenna's fault when at Final 5, Jenna's talking to Rupert and being like, we got to get rid of Rob. Oh, hi, Rob. You know, and so that let Rob know, okay, I can't let Tom and Rupert get together. So then he, you know, caused a fight between the two of them to do that. So yeah, everybody but Rob and Amber deserves blame for allowing them to make it that far. But then this was a situation at the Final 4 that Jenna had all the power to make one of two things happen. And she chose to go the route of, you know, being 3rd place, because even if it was a 1/3 chance that only a 1/3 chance that Rob draws the rock, she had less than a 1/3 chance of beating those two in a final immunity challenge. And so, you know, at first, looking back at my articles, at first I thought she did the right thing. But then as I thought about it more and I, you know, looked through my articles, I, you know, ended up where I am now. She should have forced the tie. I mean, the thing is, people don't like to put their, you know, fate in that in the hands of chance.
Yeah.
They want to at least feel like they're taking the action. And so if, you know, by doing it this way, she could feel like, well, I can do well at this challenge. It's all in my hands. Whereas otherwise it would just be random. And so, you know, it's hard for people to put themselves into a random situation. Ask my Survivor podcast co-host about that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm sure that Jenna also remembered that you get more money as a 3rd placer than you do as a 4th placer. And if she forces the rocks, she also has a 1/3 chance of going home right then and there and not even getting to advance to a less than 1/3 chance of winning final immunity.
And David, I love how you kind of framed it like the mathematical chances here, because we know Jenna didn't do that. Like, we know, if you told Jenna you have a less than a 1/3 chance of winning the final immunity, she goes, no, I don't. And like, of course she was, you know, she's like stubborn and she, you know, she has a really strong will. So I don't think it's crazy, you know, in her perspective, like I could totally win out here, but like Rob and Amber are athletic. You know, they're very capable of beating you outright, and you know they're going to pick each other. I wouldn't have made the move Jenna did. I would have made very many different moves than Jenna did, actually.
Yeah.
But I also feel like if Jenna didn't do that and betrayed, you know, just like with Ramona, even in Borneo, like Rupert, you know, she kind of adores and she's willing to cut him in order to advance herself. She wouldn't be Jenna Lewis if she took the easy way, like the strategically most optimal move, versus the one that put her in a more difficult situation because she wants the challenge.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think through All Stars, all of the final immunity challenges are an endurance challenge of some kind.
Nearly all of them.
Most of
I think
them
Australia
are.
is like a Fallen Comrades thing.
So you have a statistical likelihood that what it's going to be. Jenna Lewis does not give me the energy of someone who is going to be able to sit still and concentrate for an extended period of time. She kind of, you know, she's going to be chatting a lot. I feel like she wants to move around a lot.
Yeah, she's like her nickname in Borneo was Speedball. I think that's that's what Sue says when she says which pagongs we're going to target first. Like Speedball, Jenna, she's going to get real annoying. And we really need to start wrapping up soon, but I get so excited to talk about Survivor, especially with someone as fun as David. So the mock tribal council in All Stars, where Rob plays as Jeff Probst, they think Jenna Lewis will be the first one voted off as Saboga, like in their characterizations. And Sue plays both Jenna and Rudy because Rob Cesternino is playing Jeff Probst, so she has to play as two people. And Sue totally does a Jenna that is her Borneo impression of Jenna, which is that she is so annoying. She never shuts up. She's so over the top and energetic. And when she plays Rudy, she votes for Rudy and she goes, "I'm voting for Jenna," which Nigel and I quote all the time, Jenna. And says that she annoyed me the first time in Borneo and she annoyed me here too. I'm voting for Jenna. And let's like, that is the impression of Jenna by her, like her colleagues, her peers, is that she's like an annoying person who will likely go home early, but she makes it all the way. She outlasts everyone on Saboga, actually. So in the ironic twist of fate, that's how it happened.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, that goes back to, something that I say frequently is as long as you're not so annoying that you get, you really piss people off to get voted out, strategy is what matters. And she does pull together the people, and she, whether or not I like the fact that she was aiming for the winners, the first vote, if you can get people on board for any reason, then you're golden. And she had these people just sitting right there. Like, they've already won. This is an easy reason to get everyone on board. She didn't have to do a lot of complex strategizing. She was like, look, they won. Get rid of them.
Yeah. Sometimes, keep it simple, stupid. Like she's just like, we have a majority. They're on the outs. Let's do it. And I kind of respect her for being so bold. I do want to read, there was one other Reality News Online column that I found from the All-Stars premiere by Ken Kellum III, David. And I just found a Jenna moment that I wanted to acknowledge here because, again, the depiction of Jenna, we're trying to get this historical viewpoint. Okay. There is, however, one person in the tribe who I hope gets the boot rather quickly, and it's not Jerry. No, I'm talking about Jenna Lewis. Never did I imagine I would despise her more than Jerry. And never did I imagine I would despise her even more than the other Jenna. However, she seems to not have learned from the last time she played the game when she was ousted in Borneo. Rudy said he was eliminating the big mouth. This time, Ethan commented that if she had kept her running mouth shut, she would have she'd bite herself in the butt. I can understand why she wouldn't want someone to win twice, but she seemed to have serious issues with Tina and Ethan. Her most obnoxious moment came when she said, quote, "It's our game now, so get the hell off our playing field," end quote. Personally, I think that for her to say that takes a lot of gall, considering she's even lucky to be in this game, and Ethan and Tina probably deserve to be there more than she does. Remember when she was one of the originally pagonged? Hopefully the others will tire of her quickly and she'll be yapping her traps somewhere else. And little did Ken Kellum III know Jenna Lewis would be there for the entire duration of All Stars, running her mouth, making herself a fool at times, but forever giving us something to talk about. So that's my the conclusion of my Jenna historical research
there. So, David, having gone through all of this information, jumping in the time machine to look back on the Jenna Lewis experience, do you believe that Jenna Lewis is the perfect heel turn?
It's interesting because the perfect heel turn. I think she always had some villain in her. I mean, even going back, and this isn't something we talked about, but going back to when she voted out Ramona, she was Ramona's friend, supposedly. But then she was complaining like, oh, Ramona isn't doing enough work. And then she'd say, well, Ramona's doing more work, but it's too little, too late. It's like, Ramona was sick. Give the woman a break, And so there was a villain in there already. And kind of an excuse of a reason to vote someone out even then. I do think that while she's not necessarily remembered for that, it's something that we saw in the rewatch. And so just as there's a kernel of strategy in her in Borneo. There's also a kernel of the villain in her there. So I don't know that it was a heel turn, but a heel growth. Like she flourished as a heel more.
Yeah. I think that's actually a great point. Like she grew into her own, and that's why I do think she is, I'll answer as she is the perfect heel turn, because I think Stephanie is a pretty good, like a hero to villain, like back to back. But like then Stephanie comes back for heroes versus villains, and they kind of like retcon her as full hero and kind of like erase the Guatemala side of things, which I think maybe Jenna Lewis still stands out as someone who was so different from her 2 seasons. So to me, she is the perfect heel turn. What about you, Nige?
So, I think that coming into this conversation, I think I would have said that Jenna is the perfect heel turn. But as I've thought a little bit about the edit that she receives, because I think you're totally right, David, that there are all these kernels of villain that exist in Borneo, but because her video from home is so impactful, and I think the way that it's edited, she is remembered as a hero, even if that is not the most accurate way of portraying Jenna. But I think, David, I've actually been convinced in thinking about all of the strategy that we've been talking about, that I think you've highlighted, that I think from a story perspective, Jenna could have been the perfect heel turn had she actually succeeded and gotten to one of those final 2 spots. But I think that she's perhaps almost used as a way to soften a little bit the win of Amber and Robin Amber as our final 2, because I think we are supposed to be glad that Jenna loses at 3 and is not one of the final 2. So I think that her story may have felt even a little more satisfying if it had been the story of she gets there, we have to get rid of the winners, this is our time, and is actually able to deliver on that.
Yeah.
But in the end, she's just really annoying and they don't want to take her to the end.
And
right.
And I think actually a good point here is that if you see her as a foil to Amber, both cusp all-star returning options, Jenna Lewis, I think, is framed as entitled, obnoxious, condescending. And Amber, as much as people might criticize her, I think Amber is very grateful for her experiences. She's very much thankful of like the car that she gets, and she's like super open to all those experiences. And she gets the respect of Sheehan, who Jenna Lewis does not. And so like you can see that as a difference. And I feel like maybe they could ramp up Jenna's edit to make Amber again more palatable. But I want to ask the 2 of you, as we think about closing this, is what do you think Jenna Lewis's edit would have been had she won the final immunity challenge and she brings, I think she said she would have brought Rob, and we're going to assume that she beats Rob here. What edit does she get? Is she still going to be that villain, or are they going to give her a more heroic edit? Like what's that Jenna look like?
Well, just one thing. If she had done that at Final 4, she couldn't have taken Rob because Rob would have been gone.
Oh, Final 3 immunity.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, if she won Final 3 immunity, yes. That's interesting. I do think they would have left out some of the part, like they would not have had Rupert saying, I didn't even want to be, aligned with her anymore, and things like that. They could have dropped certain things. They could have made other people seem more villainous. I mean, the Sheehan fights, admittedly, to my biased eyes, Sheehan was the hero in those. But if Sheehan is the one saying this, and then in the end, Jenna pulls it off, well, then Sheehan's a dummy, because Sheehan was saying you're never going to win if you play this way. So then I think it turns and Sheehan gets a worse edit, and Jenna gets a better edit.
Yeah. I think that you're right, David. I think especially about you probably have to edit some of the others in a more villainous light than you would have otherwise, because I don't think you can remove some of that negativity that Jenna has somewhere along the way. I think that they probably have to portray her as, an even more villainous, cutthroat winner that is able to emerge out of All Stars. I think that's a story that you can really spin. You get all of these greats together and the most cutthroat person wins. She lands on the beach and says, all these winners are out of here. Then you have to make Tina look bad and Ethan look bad. And
I think my thought is Jenna would probably get a negative edit in the beginning, right? But we're supposed to kind of soften to her as the season goes on, because Rob will still be yelled at by Lex. Like they're
Right.
still, you know, he's
yeah.
still in the other
Yeah.
chair, right? So I think if Jenna wins, she is the anti-Rob in a way. She, you know, they maybe tone down some of her strategic choices in the end game. And that she's the likable single mom that's willing to do whatever it takes to benefit the lives of her family, right? Like, and Jenna does that. I think there's something really admirable about how she puts her family first, and she really wants to succeed. And Rupert seems kind of forgiving of Jenna, even though she votes for him out, because he gets that, like, this is a life-changing amount of money, especially for someone like Jenna. So how can I really be that mad? And they'd probably frame it in those ways. And I think they would totally do the whole, the first time to play the game played me. Now I played the game.
Right.
I'm the one pagonging. So like, I think we would probably really respect Jenna a lot more, where she's kind of this like middling villain in the All-Stars edit that we receive, because she is not the winner.
And I think there'd be an interesting contrast with Jenna as someone who was very upfront, tells Ethan, yeah, you're next to go here. Whereas Rob is deceptive and hurts people. No, Jenna never hurt you. She annoyed you, but she did not hurt you.
And Jenna's a hard worker around camp, so they probably highlight Rob and Amber like laying around a lot more and not doing much. And maybe instead of like Tom and Rupert doing a lot of the camp life scenes, maybe Jenna's in those scenes instead, because Jenna, I think, is a hard worker. I think BB in Borneo mentions early on that like there's only 3 people that do work around here other than himself.
Yeah.
Gretchen, Craig, he means Greg, and the woman, I forgot her name, I think she's in the pink bathing suit, that's Jenna. And so there is a, you know, I think there is an angle about Jenna to be more positive, but I do think it's also kind of crazy thing about Jenna as a winner, because Jenna also sets the record in Borneo as the most votes cast against anyone in a season, because she does irritate the people around her, and a record later broken by the likes of like Jerry Manthe, Jonathan Penner, Philip Shepard, and Karishma Patel. So like Jenna Lewis is like the standard bearer, and like, yeah, I think forever she was always like the most annoying person to me, but like to see her actually really as a foremother of Survivor in a way, it makes me really appreciate a lot about her. And I hope some people who listen to this today will find that appreciation for Jenna.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah. No, the one other thing I think that we would have seen is, I bet there are in, you know, old film clips somewhere, her saying in confessional, my plan is to go to the end and win the immunity and take Rob to the end. And I'm sure those clips would have come out and she would have seemed brilliant. And it's like, how did she know she'd be able to do that? And instead of what actually happened.
Yeah.
And we know it's because she happened to get lucky that time instead of what really happened.
Yeah. And then Jenna Lewis is on Game Changers as the first All-Star winner. And then she's on Winners at War. Who knows where it could have gone with the Jenna is right edit, you know?
We would have had, instead of Amber there, the legendary Jenna and Rob are there, and she defeated him in a tribal
and
council.
Rob proposes to Jenna at the final tribal council. And like, this is the new storyline we're going with.
And that actually reminds me, I think it was maybe at the Heroes versus Villains finale. Kev, you've shown me this clip before. It is Rob C with Jenna Maraska, Rob Mariano, and Amber. And Amber says, look, it's the 2 Robs and the 2 Jennas. Wait, I'm not Jenna.
yes. So I will correct that. That is, I think that's from maybe Evolution of Strategy. It's a Rob Cesternino has mentioned that before. It's like one of the things he remembers most about Amber. It's like, what do you mean? You're Amber. It's like, that's our All-Star winner, folks. That's half of the most scene-stealing, reality television dominating duo that's ever been told. And I love that. It's one of my favorite stories. But Nigel, do you have any final hot takes on Jenna?
I don't think I have any hot takes left about Jenna. I just really appreciate that she, I think, especially in the current world that we find ourselves in with reality television, where I think people with social media are so aware of how you will be perceived, and I think very cognizant of it. And that can really affect the way that people carry themselves in these reality show games. I love that Jenna Lewis feels so far from that world that we currently find ourselves in. And I really appreciate that she lived those, 38 days, I think, in All-Stars as herself as much as she possibly could have.
Yeah. David, any final thoughts?
No, I think, I think we've hit on all the main topics. It's definitely the most thought I have given to Jenna, I will say, because I mean, coming out, I mean, I've watched Borneo. I think that was my 5th time. It could have been my 6th or more. But Jenna is not usually the one I'm paying attention to. And I'm even doing some of my TikTok videos. And there are just so many clips from Borneo about, that go back to the essence of my rules, which makes sense since I created them originally based on Borneo. And so I'm putting those out there, and those are the people I focus on. Rich and Rudy, and even Kelly and Sue. And in that mindset, Jenna's just one of those people who wasn't smart enough to catch on quick enough. Then fast forward to All Stars, and honestly, before rewatching it, if you had said to me, David, what place does Jenna come in? I'd have been like, I don't know, 10th, 8th. I don't know. I mean, I've seen that. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I was, like I said, I was there live, and I'm sure I've seen it in a rewatch since then. I just I blanked her out because she was not the focal point of All Stars either. It was the Rob and Amber show. And then, Rupert was there and all these others. And I'm sure if, we had had a discussion about it, it would have triggered a memory, but not off the top of my head. So this has been, good to go back and be like, okay, what did she do? And how did she grow in between them? And I think it would be interesting to see her again now. I mean, I think you could say that about a lot of people, but like, I see her on Twitter and she doesn't say much, but what she does say seems pretty intelligent. And so, I think this has been really fun to go back and focus on someone who I'm not used to focusing on.
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite recordings I think we've ever done on You Thought You Knew, because there's just so much to do, because I think Jenna Lewis, unfortunately, in 2 seasons, she's in star-studded casts. Like, it's really hard to hold a candle. The 2 final 2s in her seasons are 2 of the most iconic final 2s of all time. So like, she's not going to be talked about in the same way. But I think there actually is a good amount of meat to talk about with Jenna if you really want to commit yourself to that, which most people are not going to. And I understand that. And I respect their dedication to their mental health. But like, there is something so, I think, fun and raw about Jenna that I think is so interesting. And it feels like a time capsule, because I've always said, had MTV's The Challenge, back when it was Real World, Road Rules, all of that, was taking in people from different networks back then, Jenna Lewis would have been on The Challenge 12 times, in the first 10 years. I mean, she is classic reality television casting. She's the single mom, which is a classic reality TV show, especially of that time, because it's a little bit more novel. She's opinionated, confrontational. She puts everything out there. She is fairly athletic, but like not good at challenges at the same time. So it's a very interesting dichotomy there.
But throws her whole self into it.
Yeah, like she's willing to do it all. And so like, I think she totally could have been with like Veronica and Coral and like a lot of the people of who had been peers at that time, because they were similar ages to her. And so I think there's a lot to appreciate about Jenna Lewis. And I think maybe a literal interpretation isn't the most exciting Jenna, but if you can like see what Jenna offers as a character, I mean, really, there's so much.
Yeah.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this journey about Jenna Lewis as much as we did. David, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have anything that you'd like to share or plug for folks?
Oh, I never have anything to plug. No, I am on, as I mentioned, I make TikTok /YouTube/Instagram videos. Right now, 1 or 2 a day. During the Survivor season, usually 3 a day. Once Big Brother and The Challenge and Survivor and Amazing Race, and who knows what. I don't know what I'm going to be doing then, but you can find everything of mine on my Linktree, which is Linktree/David Bloomberg with a dot before the EE, because that's the way Linktree does it. Easier to remember until Threads came along was that on the different apps where you're talking, I'm at David Bloomberg. On the ones where there are videos, I'm at David Bloomberg TV, but then Threads came along and said, we're going to use your Instagram name. So on Threads, I'm at David Bloomberg TV.
Well, the link tree certainly helps to be a central location for folks to find you, right? Kev, what do we have coming up for our next episode?
So our next episode is with the Mike Bloom, and it's going to be on James Clement, where we'll answer the question, is James Clement the ultimate fan favorite? So make sure to tune in for that. And if you're interested in following me on social media, my Twitter handle is @AsianNarc, which is short for my Instagram handle @AsianNarcissist.
And you can find me at Nigel Speed on Twitter. Speed like the word speed limit. It's nice and easy. So again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you next time for our conversation on James Clement.
Thank you.
Thanks.